Welcome dear students to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. K.S. Nagaraja of Deccan College, Pune, teaching the course of Historical Linguistics. Already in modules earlier we have discussed comparative method and also reconstruction, which shows that the languages can be related. And also, we have seen that the principles involved in grouping the languages is one thing, whereas when it comes to subgrouping, the same principles cannot be used. There are other sets of principles to be used. So in this particular module, we will look at what criteria can be used to identify subgrouping as versus identifying family grouping. So family grouping and subgrouping are not one and the same. So this particular module will study this aspect in some detail with some illustrations. The procedure for the discovery of subrelationships among any number of related languages may be stated as follows. If n related languages are known, there will be n by bar half pairs of languages from which to form phonemic correspondence sets. For example, for 3 languages, 3 pairs, for 4 languages, 6 pairs, for 10 languages, 45 pairs we get. Examination of all phonemic correspondence sets for every language pair will show that the reconstructions from some pairs are the same as shown above. When there are many languages around, the natural question is how are languages classified and how the genetic families are established. Of course, already we have seen in the previous module many aspects of this, whereas how to establish language families based on genetic basis. Linguistic classification is about the relationships among languages. To see how it works, it is important to understand the terminology used. When we accept that a group of languages belong to a genetic family, the next question is what sort of internal relationship they hold among themselves. Whether all of them keep equidistance from each other or some show more closeness to each other as opposed to the rest. Depending upon the development of comparative method to a set of given languages, either it is possible to conclusively prove the internal relationships or, as in, for instance, Indo-European language family or Dravidian language family, both due to the nature of the languages themselves and also secondarily due to the presence of verifiable texts in many of them. However, with many other families like Austroasiatic or Tibeto-Burman, beyond tentatively accepting the family concept, subgroupings have not been possible to post conclusively due to paucity of study of these languages as well as due to lack of text in most of these languages. Even then, subgrouping classification is an important part of historical linguistics, similar to the families in the social society. The methods and criteria for subgrouping are the focus of this module. Subgrouping is the internal classification of language families to determine which sister languages are more closely related to one another. That means subgrouping is about the internal classification of the languages within language families. It is about the branches of a family and about which sister languages are more closely related to one another. In linguistic classification, we need names for a range of entities which distinguish language groups of greater and lesser relatedness. That is, entities with different degrees of internal diversity, each more inclusive than the level below it. Language means any distinct linguistic entity or variety which is mutually unintelligible with other such entities. A language family is a group of genetically related languages, that is, languages which share a linguistic kinship by virtue of having developed from a common ancestor. Many linguistic families are designated with an affix "un", as in Algonquian, Austronesian, Indo-European, Polynesian, Sino-Tibetan, and so on. In recent times, many scholars have begun to use the genetic unit to refer to any language family or isolate. An isolate is a language which has no known relatives. One can see module 27. That is a family with but a single member. Some of the best known isolates are Ainu, Basque, Burushaski, Nihali, etc. Language families can involve different time depths, so that some larger scale families may include smaller scale subfamilies among their members or branches. The term subgroup is relatively straightforward. It is used to refer to a group of languages within a language family which are more closely related to each other than to other languages of the family. That is, a subgroup is a branch of a family. As a proto-language, for example, Indo-European, diversifies, it develops daughter languages such as Proto-Germanic, Proto-Indo-Iranian, Proto-Celtic, and so on. If a daughter, for instance Proto-Germanic, then subsequently splits up and develops daughter languages of its own, such as English, German, and so on, then the descendants, like English, German, and others, in the case of Germanic, of the daughter language, that is a Proto-Germanic, constitute members of a subgroup, the Germanic languages. Then the original daughter language, that is the Proto-Germanic, becomes in effect an intermediate proto-language, a parent of its own immediate descendants, that is daughters, English, German, and so on, but still at the same time a descendant, that is a daughter itself of the original proto-language, Proto-Indo-European. It is common for a language over time to diversify, to split up into two or more daughter languages, with the consequence that the earlier language ceases to be spoken except as reflected in its descendants. This means that the original language come to constitute a proto-language. After the breakup of the original proto-language, a daughter language, for example Western Romance, which split off from Proto-Romance, may itself subsequently diversify into daughters of its own. For instance, Western Romance split up into Spanish, Portuguese, French, and others. This gives the first daughter language to branch off, that is Western Romance in this case, an intermediate position in the family tree. It is a daughter of the original proto-language, that is Proto-Romance, and it is an ancestor to its own daughters. Western Romance is the parent of Spanish, Portuguese, and French. So, The languages which branch off from the intermediate language, in this case Western Romance, belong to the same subgroup, like Spanish, Portuguese and French are more immediate daughters of Western Romance, thus belonging to the Western Romance subgroup, which itself belongs to the Romance family. So a subgroup then is all the daughters which descend from an ancestor, intermediate proto-language, which itself has at least one sister. To say that certain languages belong to the same subgroup means that they share a common parent language, which is itself a daughter of a higher order proto-language, just as English is the descendant of Proto-Germanic. There is daughter with its other Germanic sister languages such as German, Swedish, Icelandic and others, and so is a member of the Germanic subgroup, which in turn is a daughter or branch of Proto-Indo-European, together with other subgroups such as Slavic, Italic, Celtic, Indo-Iranian and so on, which have their own later daughter languages. Also, after the breakup of the original proto-language, a daughter language may remain unified, such a language which branches off directly from the proto-language and does not later split up into other languages constitutes a subgroup or a branch of the family all by itself, a subgroup with only a single member. The goal of subgrouping is to determine which languages belong to intermediate parents. The purpose of subgrouping is to determine the family tree for genetically related languages. While establishment of language family is based on common inheritance, shared innovation alone provides evidence for subgrouping. This is the most crucial point which differentiates between family and subfamily. A shared innovation is a linguistic change which shows a departure or innovation from some trait of the proto-language and is shared by a subset of the daughter languages. It is assumed that a shared innovation is the result of a change which took place in a single daughter language, which then subsequently diversified into daughters of its own, each of which inherits the results of the change. Thus, the innovation is shared by the descendants of this intermediate parent, but is not shared by languages in other subgroup of the family, since they do not descend from the intermediate parent that underwent the change, which the more closely related languages share through inheritance from their more immediate parent. The fact that they share the innovations means that they contain evidence which suggests that they were formerly a single language which underwent the change and then subsequently split up, leaving evidence of this change in its daughters. Some illustrations. A number of attempts have been made to produce more explicit formalisms based on these principles to represent the processes involved. Usually, these take the form of enumerating the various configurations of tree diagrams that can be devised for a given number of related languages and presenting procedures for choosing between them. Probably the most important and characteristically highly formalized one was by Honeywell, 1960-1966. Also, of course, Gleason, 1959, gives similar consideration to the possible relationships between African languages, but his perspective is more quantitative, while Southworth, 1964, attempts to reconcile the tree formalism with the problems of overlapping isoclasses. Here, a summary of Honeywell's classification has been presented. To illustrate the general approach, we may consider two hypothetical languages, A and B. They can be related in three possible ways. A is the mother of B, B is the mother of A, C, A and B are sisters with a non-attested mother X. Corresponding to these three relationships, we can establish three alternative trees as given below. Here, no problems of grouping involved, but merely the difference between descent and sister relationship. So here we can see A, B, C, only two languages are involved. B is derived from A in one case, or A is derived from B. In other case, A and B both are derived from X. So tree A above is identical with X. Thus, if in comparing two languages, we find that all the innovations, splits, mergers, etc., have occurred in only one, then the resulting proto-language will be identical with the non-innovating language, which can be taken to be the mother. Methodologically, it is in fact impossible to distinguish a mother-daughter relationship from a situation where one of the two sister languages has remained unchanged from the proto-language. Cases where one of the languages compared is actually an ancestor of the other are in any case rare, since where both a mother and daughter are apparently extant, the mother may well turn out to be an elder sister or an aunt. The Romance languages are said to be derived from Latin, but reconstructed Proto-Romance is not identical to attested classical Latin, but is its sister. So, when the number of languages increase, suppose one more language is added to 2, that means if you have 3 languages, the possible configurations of the tree become more numerous and the problem of subgrouping arises. There are in fact 6 different configurations that can be obtained with 3 languages. They are the following. So you can see here that 6 possibilities are given. All but the first of these comprise a set of variants depending on which language occupies which position in the tree. In the case of the tree of tree A, all the languages are assumed to be derived directly from the proto-language X with no subgrouping, while tree D assumes a subgroup embracing 2 of the 3 languages which are more closely related to each other than to the third language. The first 3 trees above involve exactly the same principles as those illustrated in the previous section, with various combinations of descent and sister relationship. The last 3 are more complex and require a different approach, though in fact the method is merely an extension of that used for 2 languages, since it involves examining languages pairwise, whether AB, BAC, BC, etc., and reconstructing a proto-language for each pair. Suppose comparison of A and B yields a proto-language AB, that A and C yields AC, and that of B and C yields BC. Questions of descent and sister relationship can be settled as before in terms of the identity or otherwise of three proto-languages with the actual languages compared. Thus, if proto-language AB equals A, then A is the ancestor of B, as in trees B, C, and E. In the case of tree B, we will find not only that AB equals A and AC equals A, but also that BC equals CA. In tree C, we find not only BC equals B, but also AB equals A, with AC equals A is a corollary. The proto-languages constructed on the basis of different pairs may also turn out to be identical with one another. That is, AB equals AC equals BC, in which case the pairs can be amalgamated as descendants of a common proto-language, that is, ABC are all derived from the same source as in tree A. This situation is likely to arise from the comparison of a set of closely related sister languages or dialects where there is no evidence of intermediate grouping. These comparisons give us the possibility of distinguishing descent from sister relationships, but they do not cater for subgrouping. Where such subgroupings occur, we will find that the different proto-languages derived from comparisons of the pairs are identical neither to one of the languages compared nor to one another, but they are related, and we need some means of interpreting these relationships. Consider the case where two of the reconstructed proto-languages, say AC and BC, are identical, but one AB is different. A and B can then be joined together as a subgroup, giving the configuration of tree D. Then tree E and F are simply variants of D, where one of the languages is identical to the proto-language. In E, Y is identical to A, and in F, X is identical to C. A couple of illustrations from actual languages provided. In A might be Vulgar Latin, thought of in this example as extant in formal inscriptions, authors like Petronius, etc. B, French, and C, Spanish. In B, A might be Vulgar Latin, B, French, C, Oscan. In C, A might be Oscan, B, French, C, Spanish. When the number of languages increase, the subgroupings become much more complex, and but the methodology is exactly same as we have seen earlier. So here is a tree diagram which involves 4 languages. So here from the proto stage we have 2 intermediate sub branches, intermediate proto stages we get, and this kind of tree diagrams. In fact, this is one type, taking 4 languages into account. There are other possibilities. So we will not go into those things, but a few observations here. 2 or more related languages can belong to different subfamilies only if one subfamily is a subfamily within the other. That is, only if the sub-proto-languages are in a descendant relationship, but not if they are in an ordinary sister relationship. French is both Romance and Italic, but it could not also be Celtic, since Celtic is neither a subfamily of Romance or of Italic nor vice versa. Now we look at some data from the Indo-Aryan stage. Here is a limited data from the modern Indo-Aryan languages. Here we have data from Odia, Assamese, Bengali, Hindi. In fact, those who know these languages know that Odia, Assami, Bengali share common innovations as versus Hindi. So here the data will show that these three languages, Odia, Assamese, Bengali, have lost length contrast. In other words, there's a merger of length distinction, which is found in Hindi. Hindi maintains the length contrast between short and long E, short and long U, whereas the other languages, other three languages, Odia, Assamese, Bengali, have lost this feature. So on this basis, we have a subgroup distinction can be shown here. So we have Proto-Indic, Hindi. Definitely Hindi is a sister, no doubt, but not a descendant. So Bengali, Odia and Assamese are descendants from the intermediate subgroup Proto-Eastern Indic. So in this way, a tree diagram can show the subgroupings, sub-branches of intermediate stages. Further, depending upon the shared innovations between any two daughter languages, relationships can be shown, like ABC, AB or BC or AC. So here, or Bengali and Odia share more features in common, or Odia and Assamese are close, or Bengali and Assamese are close, will decide the structuring of the subgroups, and the branching tree diagrams can be provided appropriately. However, in case all the three daughters stand apart by having equal number of innovations and shared features, that means if they do not facilitate further subgroupings, then we obtain a brush-like diagram wherein we understand that they are equidistant to all in their developments. Under genetic hypothesis, establishing that a couple of languages belong to one family is the first step in comparative method. For that, we look for common retention in the daughter languages. However, when it comes to subgrouping, we look for common innovation in the couple of languages which have them. Those members of the family share common innovations will climb to belong to a sub-branch, otherwise not. So for instance, taking Indo-Aryan languages, Hindi, Bengali, Odia and Assamese, all members of modern Indo-Aryan, and share many similar sound changes between them. However, there are some differences between them as well, as already shown, already explained. A shared innovation is merely something that different daughter languages inherit unchanged from the proto-language, regardless of whether the daughters belong to the same subgroup or not. One line may be given for the limitations of tree diagrams. In fact, we have already said in the previous module. All that has been discussed in this module is, of course, dependent on the assumption that linguistic relationships are expressible by means of tree diagrams, and the comparative method offers us no alternative to such an assumption. Hence, all relationships must be expressed in these terms, and subgroupings of languages can likewise only be represented as branches of these trees. We must, however, bear in mind the fundamental problems that arise with the historical interpretation of trees discussed above. To summarize then, while establishing language grouping, we look at the common inherents among the languages concerned, whereas when we are subgrouping them, we look at common innovations or aberrances found in some of the daughter languages and not all of them. So this feature is of crucial importance in subgrouping. This is an important aspect, often forgotten and not discussed by most of the scholars. In fact, Honigswald has discussed this in great detail. So this is a complex issue actually. When the number of languages involved are more, the possibilities increase, and more the possibilities, more the complexities. Therefore, the students have to be extremely careful in studying the subgrouping issue and identify clearly what features are innovated and what features are not, because glossing all under one will create confusion and will not give any proper solution. So this course is of great relevance. Students should take note of them and study the references provided for a better understanding of this.